If you're an entrepreneur raising venture capital, it's important you understand the principles around the limited partnership agreement, what we call the LPA. The LPA is really just a legal document that formally lays out the rules of the road between the LP and the GP. This includes the economic relationship and the governance relationship between them. An entrepreneur should care about the economic terms of the LPA because they stipulate how the financial incentives, or more simply, how the money will be distributed. Money drives behavior, and how a VC fund gets paid will affect how the GPs will interact with your startup. So let's kick off with the management fee. This is really the cornerstone of the economic and the financial relationship between the LP and the GP. Most GPs charge an annual management fee that's calculated as a percentage of the capital that the GP is managing. And the LP has committed to contribute to the GP over the life of the fund. Typical VC firms charge about 2% annually, but some of the more successful ones are able to charge as much as 3%. Let's do a quick example to clarify that. When a GP closes a fund of about 100 million $, it doesn't collect that 100 million upfront from the LPs. Instead, the LPs make a financial commitment to provide the capital when called by the GP. There's a simple reason for that. If the GP collected the money upfront and it sat idle in a bank account before being invested for an extended period of time, it would reduce the ultimate rate of return the GP can generate for its LPs. So just-in-time calling of capital eliminates this drag on returns. In most cases, the capital will be called in the first 3 to 4 years of the partnership because that's when most of the investments will take place. So even though the GP is not investing the full 100 million upfront, he's able to charge a 2% management fee. Now, there are some exceptions where some VC funds charge the management fee on a pay-as-you-go basis and only collect fees when money is invested. But that's the exception, not the norm. So what's the management fee for? It's really just a pot of money that the GP uses to pay its operational expenses. Things like salaries, rent, travel, and other day-to-day expenses that are incurred to run its office. Obviously, from the LP's perspective, they would like to keep the management fee as low as possible because it reduces their returns. So sometimes the LPA includes provisions to say that the fee changes as the fund ages. Typically, most of the work the GP will have to do will occur in the first 3 to 4 years of the fund, when GPs are evaluating and selecting investments. That's an intense period of work, and LPs are willing to pay the full management fee during this time. But as the fund ages, the GP's activity shifts to managing existing investments as opposed to finding new ones. This is a different and often less intense phase. So many funds start to have a step down or reduction in the management fee. Usually the step down will be a reduction of 50 to 100 basis points to the 2% management fee originally charged. The second way to reduce fees is to change the application of the fee from committed capital to the cost of investments remaining in the portfolio. So if, for example, we were in year 9 of a 10-year fund of 100 million and only one investment remained in the portfolio and that investment had cost 10 million, the fee would be applied on 10 million. The final part of the management fee relates to ancillary fees. Sometimes a GP gets compensated by a portfolio company for the engagement with that company. For example, the GP may get director's fees for sitting on the board. The question then becomes, what does the GP do with these director's fees? In most LPAs, the GP can keep the compensation, but they need to credit the director's fee received against what they claim from the LPs as a management fee. In a nutshell, the effect on the GP should be zero because directors' fees received will result in an equivalent reduction in the management fees charged to the LPs. So there's no double dipping allowed by GPs, and in most cases, when GPs sit on the board of an investee company, they're not necessarily incentivized by the prospect of any management or director's fee. Obviously, sometimes the LPs can waiver this arrangement and allow GPs to earn ancillary fees without impacting on their management fee. The next thing I'm going to talk about is carried interest. Now, carried interest is really how the GP makes real money from the fund that they are managing. In venture capital, carried interest refers to the portion of the profits that the GP generates on investments that he's entitled to keep. And that often ranges between 20 to 30% of the profits. And how the profits are defined and distributed between the LP and the GP, that's set out in the LPA. So let's do a quick example again. Imagine we have a 100 million venture fund and we're in year 3 of that fund. The GP invested 10 million in one of its portfolio companies in earlier years, and it's now sold that company for 60 million. So there's a paper profit of 50 million that's been made. The remaining 90 million in the fund has been invested in other companies, but none of these have been sold yet. So how would the 60 million received from the sale of this investment be divided up? Well, firstly, 10 million has to go straight back to the LPs to return the original capital or principal they provided. Of the remaining 50 million, assuming a 20% carry by the GP, 10 million would go to the GP and the remaining 40 million would be distributed to the LPs. Now, this example is a bit simplistic, but it demonstrates the point. In the real world, a venture fund would typically be calling funds from the LPs in the first few years, but would also be subject to significant cash outflows as these funds are invested in the underlying portfolio companies. Remember, venture capital is a long-term game. It often takes 10 or more years for companies to be sold or to go public. The effect of this on most funds is that they experience a J-curve on the cash flows. In the early years, as investments are made, there are massive cash outflows. In later years, as the fund matures and profits are realized from the underlying portfolio, significant cash inflows can be enjoyed. That's the outcome that successful GPs are trying to manage in their portfolios.